comfortable. I hope you ate a good breakfast and you had some coffee, because we're really going to need to focus on this sikha. It's sikha on Parshas Bay, Seif Aleph. I'm going to ask that anybody who has any questions or wants something repeated or clarified should type it into the chat. I opened up the chat. It's open, so I won't just have to be attentive to what's flitting across the screen. And we'll do it if by if, unless you feel that it must be clarified before we continue, then please make that known, and I will, Be'ezus Hashem, try my best to explain. Seif Aleph, HaMitzvah lekadesh chadashim ulechashev shanim v'chadashim beveistin bilvad. The mitzvah to sanctify months and to calculate years and months only through the agency of the Beis Din. Nilmedes min hakasov, this mitzvah, which the description of the mitzvah is taken from the words of the Rambam, and this mitzvah is derived from a pasuk in this week's parsha, which is HaChodesh Hazel Lachem Rosh Chadashim. This month will be for you the first of the months. Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chatzei Hashana. It will be the first to the months of the year. U'b'makam acher le'il, and elsewhere above, and actually it's the first Rashi of the entire Torah. The Rebbe never tired of citing this Rashi. Kasav Rashi b'Perushay b'negei lemitzvah zu. Rashi references this mitzvah, and he writes over there, Loi hayatzarech lahatzchil esatara ela me'echad zelachem shehi mitzvah rishona. Rashi says, really, the Torah should have started with this pasuk, HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, this month is to you, because it's the first mitzvah shenitztavu ba Yisrael that the Jews were commanded. V'shambir matam pasach bereishis, and over there he explains why the Torah starts with Bereshis bara Elokim, and just to review, Rashi teaches that it starts with Bereshis bara Elokim, so if the nations come and they say to us that you're not the indigenous people and that you're colonists and you're taking away a land that doesn't belong to you, we will be able to say, Bereshis bara Elokim, Hashem created the world, Hashem is the boss, Hashem gave the land first to other nations, then he took it away from them and he gave it to us, and that's it. Period, exclamation point. Okay. The Rebbe says, however, you should be aware of the fact that those who enumerate, who listed the mitzvahs, the Rambam and others, b'manoisam es minin ha-mitzvahs kasidron, when they enumerate the mitzvahs in order, lo yehiviu ubedafka es mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh k'mitzvah rishona. They did not bring this mitzvah of kiddush hachodesh as the first mitzvah, even though Rashi says it's the first mitzvah. They don't bring it, and the Rebbe says in parentheses ubedafka, and this is intentional. Uladugma, for instance, Harambam Kasav, the Rambam writes, mitzvah rishona. What's the first mitzvah? The first mitzvah, mitzvah say, from the positive mitzvahs is Leida sheyesham elokah shenemar noichi Hashem elokecha, is to know that there's a God, as it says, I am God, your God. Vatam lekach muvam bepashtos, and why the Rambam asserts that Anochi Hashem elokecha, that knowing that there is a God is the first mitzvah, is simply understood. Because Yedias v'kiyum kol ha-mitzvahs ein lehem mokam ela la'achri ha'yedias she'esh Hashem elokah. Because what would be the point of mitzvahs and keeping these mitzvahs unless you know that there's a God? Ukilshayne bereish halachis, and as the Rambam says in his own terminology at the beginning of all the halachas, he says she'yediazu, this knowledge that there's a God, he yisoid hayisoides va'amod hachachmais. It's the basis of all basics, and it is the pillar of all knowledge, to know that there's a God. Umashakasav Rashi Rishona. So, but Rashi writes that HaChodesh Hazel Lachem is the first mitzvah. So the Rebbe says, Kavanasei bepashtos, simply it seems that his intention in writing that this mitzvah is the first is le'inyin makom ksivasa b'Torah. It's only vis-a-vis its placement in the Torah. but not the first in terms of importance. Ulam, however, Kevon shekol inyanim shebetarehim b'diyuk. Okay, so the Rebbe says we could understand why Rashi would say it's the first, because it chronologically in the Torah it's mentioned first as the first mitzvah. We could understand why the Rambam wouldn't place it first, because conceptually there's something that has to come before all mitzvahs, and that is knowing that there's a God. But the Rebbe says, but still, because all concepts in the Torah are perfectly specific and b'diuk means help me here. I don't know why I'm exact. Thank you. Yesh loymar. We have to say she'af al pi shebiyachas la'adam hagavra hine mitzvah rishona leida sham Eloka. We have to know that even though, as it relates to people, the gavra, the person who has to keep mitzvahs, the first mitzvah is to know that there's a God. Ubulashon Razal, and in the terminology of our sages, tchilat tzarech sheyikabel olav ol malchus shamayim. First, a person has to take upon themselves the yoke of heaven. They have to accept that there's a God and that they want to serve God. Ulachar mikein yikabel of all mitzvahs, and then they could take upon themselves the yoke of the mitzvahs. The Rebbe says, so mitzad the gavra, as it relates to the person, knowing that there's a Hashem comes first. Mikol makoim mitzad ha'Torah mitzad ha'chefza, but still in all, from the perspective of the Torah, from the perspective of the object, ha-mitzvah rishona, shebo l'chayra hayatzarach lahatchilas ha'Torah, the first mitzvah, with which Rashi asserts should have been the way in which the Torah began, hi ha'chodesh hazeh lachem. The first mitzvah is this mitzvah from this week's parsha. Lefi sheyesh b'mitzvah zu toichen ikri v'yisoidi b'chlalos ha'Torah v'hamitzvahs. The Rebbe says, why is this the first mitzvah? Because this mitzvah contains something that is axiomatic and absolutely foundational in all Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore, it's not just that it's mentioned in the Torah first, but that it actually has prominence that would have made it what should have been the first pasuk in the entire Torah. And the Rebbe says that this specific content that is connected to this mitzvah, that is so foundational, that is so axiomatic, is actually comprised of 3 points. First of all, Aleph, mitzvah zu meira milamedes as oifen nesinas haTorah. First of all, it teaches us about how the Torah was transmitted. Beis, mitzvah zu mabia bigaloyes koyach haTorah v'mitzvahs. This mitzvah expresses in revealed manner the strength of Torah and mitzvahs. And Gimel, mitzvah zu mivataz bahadgasha, this mitzvah expresses in underscored manner as hamatara bahatachlis shel mitzvahs haTorah. It expresses in very, very strong manner the purpose and the goal of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Okay? So the Rebbe says it's not just that this is mentioned first in terms of mitzvahs. And I know that some of you may be thinking that it says about pruvu, that that's the first mitzvah. We're going to leave that at a side now. But Rashi says this was the first mitzvah. The Torah should have started with this mitzvah, but Hashem first had to tell everybody who the boss is, primarily so we should know who the boss is and we shouldn't back down from our detractors. And so the Rebbe says it's not happenstance. This mitzvah has to have extreme import, and he breaks down the 3 things that this mitzvah is going to teach us, which are going to become clear in the Sikha. The way in which the Torah was taught and transmitted, the way in which Torah has koyach in this world, how it affects this world. And the third is how it showcases the purpose and the goal of all mitzvahs. That's Seif Aleph. Beis. Ha'evan Ezra b'Parsha Seinu. So regarding the first point about how the Torah was taught and transmitted, the Rebbe brings down the Evan Ezra, who Heir al Kach, he mentions in this regard, Shemoshe loy pirish lanu b'Torah ech nikva hashanim b'chadashim, ve'im loy nimtza aviv ba'naseh, v'yesh l'tmaya mizeh tema gedola ech pirish dinei kol negoya mitzayir shu ba'adam echad v'lo yamoid b'chol zman v'heniach davar hamoidim shekol Yisrael chayavim l'shama b'chol zman v'yesh koris al achilas chametz pesach al achilas yom kippurim v'kasav al zeh v'zel la'ois ki samach al kriyas based in b'chol dar v'dar. I'm sorry that I did that in Hebrew, but there wasn't a natural breaking point, and now I'm going to go back and break it up unnaturally. So the Evan Ezra writes in this regard that this mitzvah teaches us a lot about how the Torah was transmitted, how it was taught. So the Evan Ezra says, this is like really unbelievable, because Moshe does not explain in the Torah how the year should be calculated, how the months should be established on the Jewish calendars, and what you should do if Pesach doesn't come out in the spring, and it says in the Torah that it has to be in spring. And this is a big wonder. How is it that the Torah clearly stipulates so many halachas about the mitzvah, about the leper, which really, it's in regard to one person, right, to individual people, and leprosy, not the, the leprosy of today, which is still, a disease that exists, a skin disease, but the biblical leprosy, it only existed for a certain amount of time. So the Torah goes on and on and on about discolorations and one here and so on and so forth. And then, on the other hand, it leaves this matter that has to do with the establishment of the calendar, which has to do really with the establishment of all the holidays, all the Moedim, which all the Jews are obligated to keep these holidays in all times, not just at a certain time in history. And you're dealing with very serious mitzvahs. It's a kares to eat chametz on Pesach. And if you don't know when is the first day of the month, you're not going to know when is Pesach, and you could chalila trespass that. Or it's a kares to eat on Yom Kippur. So the Evan Ezra says this is like a huge question. Just so cryptic, no unpacking at all about such a central matter in our life. And he says, and this is a sign, and this teaches us, ki samach al kriyas based in b'chol dar v'dar, that Moshe Rabbeinu created a system, Hashem created a system that relies on the based in of every generation. Kilaymar, that is to say, b'mitzvahs kiddush chodesh yesh ois, hechacha brura gluya. This mitzvah of sanctifying the months stands as a signpost. It is a clear and a revealed proof L'kach shehaTorah b'peirusha nitna, that the Torah was given with explanation, like the Rambam teaches, that Moshe taught each pasuk and gave the Jews explanation. Hainu shehaTorah sheba'al peh shenizgalsa al yidei chachamim b'chol ha'deiros v'haTorah shebechtav chad hein, which means that the Torah, the oral Torah, that was revealed and unfurled through the agency of the sages in every generation, and the Torah shebechtav, the Torah that Hashem dictated to Moshe, they are one and the same. You cannot access the Torah shebechtav without the Torah sheba'al peh. And they have the same gravitas and the same authority. They were given at the same time. Ubefrat, shekiyuma shel mitzvos rabbis ma'od b'Torah, hashayachas lizmani haTorah hashana, toloi dafka b'kfiyas hachadashim. And this is especially underscored through the fact that keeping so many mitzvahs in the Torah, so many mitzvahs are hinge on this mitzvah of ascertaining the months and the years, because they have to do with certain times of the year. And they depend on how the months are established by the Beis Din. And so this mitzvah, more than any other, showcases the way in which the Torah was transmitted, the way in which it was taught, the way the system was set up. That's regarding the first point that is very distinctive in this mitzvah. Gimel. Now the Rebbe is going to address the second point. Al derech zeh, in the same way, mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh mivatas umegala gam es shilton umimsheles haTorah al mitzias ha'olam. This mitzvah, the mitzvah of sanctifying the months, expresses and reveals the dominion and the sovereignty of the Torah on the existence and the actuality of the world. Ukemaimer Razal Hayadua. And like what our sages say, well-known saying of the sages, on the Pasuk in Tehillim, Ekra lelakim elyon, I will call on to the God above, lakel goimer alai, to the God who does for me. And the Gemara says, how is this God that is so transcendent and seemingly aloof, so up close and personal at the same time? One way in which this manifests is, one way in which the Torah has power to impact the metzias, the facts on the ground about this world, is in the following way. And I'm just going to give you a trigger warning that we're all going to try to figure out what this means. Don't try too hard. I think it's more of a legalistic concept than a physical or medical concept that you could try to wrap your brains around. But the Gemara says, Bas shloish shanim v'yom echad. Let's say you have a little girl. She's 3 years old and 1 day. V'nimlachin Beis Din la'avrei. And then the Beis Din decides to make the month of 30 days, right? Because a Jewish month could be of 29 days or 30 days. And the Beis Din ascertains that this month has 30 days. That means that now she's not 3 years and 1 day old. It means that she's 3 years old. What happens? Hapsulin chayzrin. So her hymenal tissue, if it was in any way impacted or torn or lacerated or punctured or whatever by some kind of injury, it can regrow. It can regenerate itself. V'im lav. But if the Beis Din does not ascertain that there's a 30th day in the month, which means that she is now 3 years old and 1 day, ein hapsulin chayzin, then the hymenal tissue cannot heal itself. It cannot regenerate. It cannot come back to the way it was originally. Okay, let's not worry our pretty heads about this. But the point is that the Rebbe would often use this assertion to explain the kayach of the Torah on the mitzius of the olam, on the fact on the ground in this world. And of course, it's also showcasing how the kayach of Torah, the power of the Torah, comes through the agency of the Beis Din. Okay. Ulefichach. Mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh hi mitzvah rishona shenistabu bo Yisrael.
Can I just make a comment about that? It's just biological, like it's like a fetus developing in the mother's womb, so it will develop a hymen. But if it's after a certain age, if that's broken, it doesn't develop it anymore.
Yeah, it's not about development; it's about regeneration. And yeah, there's a way to understand this biologically, but we're not going to go into it now because if you ask doctors or whatever, they're not going to understand. And there's other things also in halacha that are not understood physiologically today or biologically, and it just means that medicine hasn't caught up. And that's why I said we shouldn't worry our pretty heads about this. Okay. So therefore, this mitzvah of sanctifying the month is the first month that this, I'm sorry, it's the first mitzvah that Jews were commanded to do. So much so, actually, so much so that Rashi says that the Torah should have started with this. Shechein hi hamakar liyasoid b'nesinas haTorah, because in fact, it is a source for the basis in giving Torah. Emuna ba'amitius haTorah sheba'al peh. It underscores our faith in the veracity of the oral tradition. V'chein ha'emuna b'toikif haTorah v'mitzvos b'chlal, and our faith in the strength of Torah and mitzvahs in general. B'koyach shebehen l'shanais es teva u'metzius ha'olam, in how it has the strength to change the nature and the facts about the physical world. And once we understand this, then we will be able to better understand something else. Another concept will be sweetened for us. Although Rashi explains why the Torah opens up with Bereshis Bar Elokim in order to teach us that Hashem gave his nation the strength of his machinations and doings and creation. Rashi Sham, as Rashi explains there, Mikol Makim, still in all, Kevan but because Rashi says the Bereshis bara comes in place of what should have actually been the first pasuk, which is Achedesh Elachem, because Rashi says that really the Torah should have started with the first mitzvah, which is this mitzvah in this week's parsha. Mistaber Laimar, the Rebbe says it is logical to say shagam lefi hamaskana yeshayches beinehem, that that also according to this maskana, what is decided, that it shouldn't start with Hachayish Elachem. It should start with Bereshis Bara. But the fact that Bereshis Bara is almost like a placeholder for this mitzvah means that there's an inherent intrinsic connection between these two concepts. Bereshis Bara on the one hand and Hachayish Elachem on the other. So in other words, in addition to the fact that this mitzvah teaches us so much about how the Torah was transmitted, and the symbiotic relationship between the Torah Shebachsav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And then it teaches us, in startling fashion, the kayach, the power of Torah, and what the Beis Din says to impact a physiological fact on a person's body. All of this underscores the connection, the importance of these two things, Bereshis Bara and Achedesh Elachem. Val pianal hadavar move on. And according to what we said above, it's understood. Al Bereshis Bara Elokim perish Rashi b'shvil atayr shenekreis reishis darkai or b'shvil Yisrael shenikru reishis tvuasai. Rashi explains on the word Bereshis, Beis Reishis, that there are two things that are called first, that the world was created for. One is for the Torah, that is called the first of his ways, and the other is for Yisrael, that are called the first of his crops. So once we understand what Rashi explains to us, that the entire creation is for the purpose of Torah and for the purpose of Bnei Yisrael, move on, it's understood. Shekasher Beis Din Paiskim al Piatar Shechedesh Mubar, that when Beis Din adjudicate based on the Torah that the month is going to be of 30 days, Hadavar Poel Shekenia b'Metzios Ha'elam, then that impacts the physiological fact about a little girl's body. Sharei kol habriya nivra b'shvil hatayr Yisrael. Because the entire creation is only for the purpose of Torah and Yisrael. So basically, both Bereshis Bar Elokim and Achayjus Elachem are saturated with the same energy. They both carry the same message. That it's Torah and Bnei Yisrael that are the reasons for the creation of the universe. Dalit. But you would think that the Rebbe has already taught us something very, very profound, and we're done. The Rebbe says, however, Hezber ze'eina maspik. This is still not enough. Sharei shekasher based in ma'avrim esachidish b'suleh chayzrin eina inyan b'mitzvah atzma. Because that the Rebbe brought down from the Gemara, that if the Beis Din cause a month to be called a month of 30 days, so it's like a pregnant month, it has 30 days, this causes that B'suleh Chayzrin, that now her hymenal tissue can regenerate because she's only 3 years old and she's not 3 years and 1 day, and this can still happen until a certain point. And that concept that certain things can happen until a certain point and not later is well known. Everybody knows how careful you have to be with a baby's head at a certain point, and so on and so forth. There are many parallels to this. Va'af loy bilvana, elas hatzah hamizracheshes b'davar tzadi lagamri. But still, this is not something that is a mitzvah in and of itself. It's a physiological fact, and it's impacted by what the Beis Din says, and that's profound and amazing, but it's not regarding a mitzvah itself, and it's not even regarding the month itself. It's an outgrowth that is impacted, but it's something that's tangential. It's a davar study, legamre. It's a tangential thing. It doesn't have to do with the actual mitzvah. Ve'ilu mehalashon mitzvah rishona shenistabu ba Yisrael mashma she'inyan rishona kanhu b'yachas lemitzvah. But from the fact that Rashi says that this was the first mitzvah, it means that there has to be something about this mitzvah itself, not from a side thing, a tangential, peripheral thing that is impacted by this mitzvah. The mitzvah itself has to in some way be rishona, and it has to be that the content of this mitzvah and the purpose of this mitzvah reflects this and is effectuated in a way that underscores its prominence as the first. And the Rebbe says, how is this so? And he answers this question in Seif Hey, in the next section of the Torah. And here he speaks to the third point, which is the purpose and the goal of Torah. Okay, so before we go into this, let's review. If you look in Seif Aleph, the last paragraph of the first section, the Rebbe says that this mitzvah is axiomatic and foundational in 3 ways. 1, it teaches us how the Torah was transmitted and taught, which he addresses in Seif Beis in the second section of the Sikha. The second way it's foundational axiomatic is that it expresses in a revealed way the impact of Torah and mitzvahs. And that is where the Rebbe brought down the Gemara about the little girl. And now he's going to speak to the third way in which this mitzvah is singular, and that is that it expresses in a very, very strong way the purpose and the goal of Torah and mitzvahs most generally and globally. Here we go. Seif Hey. V'yesh loimer habir bazeh. So the Rebbe says, here's an explanation. Ikar inyanon shal mitzvahs haTorah hu lifol kedusha ba'olam. Right? Anybody who has a shaykhus to the Rebbe knows this concept, that the main reason for doing mitzvahs of the Torah is to bring holiness into this world, to transform the world from mundane to sacred and sublime. V'zuhi hanakuda b'chol mitzvahs Torah, and this is the central point of all of the mitzvahs in the entire Torah. Adam noitel chefza min ha'olam, va'isa isa lechefza shel mitzvah. Achu nasa le'inyan shel kedusha. A person takes an object from this world, a pedestrian object, whatever it might be, and they make it into a mitzvah object. They do a mitzvah with the object until that thing becomes holy. So your car becomes a mitzvah mobile, and your clothing become mitzvah clothes because you're doing mitzvahs, etc., etc. And this is the content of this mitzvah of sanctifying the month. It's pu'ula v'chidush shel beis din. It's a novel action on the part of the beis din. Hamekachim chefza diyoim misuyam b'torish chedesh. They take a thing, in this case, it's a particular day. They sanctify it and they say it's Rosh Chodesh. Should have started with wishing everybody a good Chodesh. Yom she'ena yom ha'maisa, and therefore, because it's Rosh Chodesh, there are certain things that we don't do. So they take a regular day, a mundane day, and they turn it into a holy day on which you don't do certain things. Umakrivin by korban miyuchad, and you do bring a special korban on that day, etc., etc. Ad asher v'hayu midei chodesh b'chadshay nase k'may umidei Shabbos b'shabta yavai kaimer. This so much so becomes the case that Rosh Chodesh is compared to Shabbos, and Shabbos is something that Hashem ascertained. The first week, the seventh day of creation, Hashem ascertained as Shabbos, and from then on, the seventh day has always been Shabbos. And so Beis Din has the kayach to turn a regular day into Rosh Chodesh, and that so much so that it should be compared in the writings of Yeshayahu to how every Shabbos is holy. And of course, this is also connected to the holiness of the holidays. Because as the Chinuch says, that the basis, the foundation of mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh is in order that Bnei Yisrael should be able to be kaveya. We should be able to ascertain when are the Yamim Tovim. Umitam zeh oimrim b'Yom Tov mikadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim, and that's why on Yom Tov we say he sanctifies the Jews and the times. He sanctifies the Jews, and then the Jews sanctify the times. Ki Yisrael dekachinuhu lizmanim, because Bnei Yisrael are in charge of sanctifying the times. So Hashem sanctifies us and gives us the agency to sanctify the times. V'yesh leimar shezeu atam liyosam mitzvah rishona. We might say that that's a reason why this is the first mitzvah. Noisaf al zeh shehanekuda klala shebechol mitzvah Torah lifol b'chefza sheyeh lechefza shel mitzvah. Because in addition to the fact that the central point of all mitzvahs of the Torah is to sanctify something pedestrian and make it holy, and this is very revealed in this mitzvah. But there's more. Mitzvah zu b'pnimis yanyanim. This mitzvah, on a deeper level, he rishayna gam b'inyana umadregaisa, is the first, not only because it's the first mitzvah that Hashem formally gives Moshe as the Jews are becoming a nation in that most nascent form of nationhood, and not only because it showcases a central point of all mitzvahs, but the Rebbe says there is a way in which this mitzvah is first conceptually and in its category. Why? Because the Rebbe says, although when it comes to the physical, material, corporeal world, there are two things that are part of creation, time and space. And these two things, time and space, are connected to each other. But the Rebbe says, "Hine beseder hakdima ba metzius hazman lifnei metzius hamakom." But when you think about these two concepts, time comes before space. And the Rebbe explains, Kichol hishavos, because all of creation, all of existence, koilel gam hishavos hamakom, inclusive of this concept we call space, harei hi shinui b'hoive hamasav shahaya ba'avar koidem hishavos. The fact that there's existence is a change. Presently, there's a world. This is a change in the situation from before there was creation. V'nimtza, so we find, shelifnei kolas avos, gam lifnei yisavos hamokim, ha'isek var mitzvah shel davar asher ishtana, la'achar mikein, v'zehu teichen in hazman. The very fact that we could talk about before creation and after creation points to the primacy of time over space. Because even before existence, before space, there was something called time. There had to be a category called time, otherwise we wouldn't be able to say before creation and after creation. So the Rebbe says that is another way in which this mitzvah is a mitzvah rishona. Kilaymar, this is to say, hamitzias harishona ba'olam, shemimena matchila mitzias kol hanimtzoim, he's man. The Rebbe is asserting that the first existence in creation, in olam, in universe, in world, from which everything else emerges, is time. In that time before time, maybe we could call it. But it's still designatable. You could still delineate that there's a before and there's an after. So Zman comes first, time comes first. And this is also simply understood relative to a person. Shetchila kayim etzla zman yom misuyam. Ula'achri ze yesh makam lepulosiv al yom zeh v'al chefter olam b'yom zeh. First, there's the fact that you were given a day. You have time. You're given a certain day. After you have a certain day, you could think about what you're going to do with that day and what you're going to interface with that day, which chefter olam, which things that exist in this world. Yeah. Yochanan Hanel is saying there was evening and there was morning, the first day. Thank you. Chani is saying that fits with the first word of the Torah, Bereshis. Thank you, thank you. First, there's time, and then there are things you're going to allot to that time. And therefore, this is yet another layer of what it means that this mitzvah is the mitzvah Rishona. Shechein tchila poyalim based in kedusha bisman. Shahu haschalas hamatzias. First, the Beis Din deals with the holiness of time, because that is the beginning of all existence. And then comes the actions of humanity, which impact the things in this world. And both what we do and what exists is all part of space. Vav. The Rebbe says, nope, I'm still not satisfied. The Rebbe has given us very, very deep explanations on how this mitzvah underscores three most important ideas about mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs in general. He has given us a profound understanding of why this is called mitzvah rishona. And he says, however, seemingly this is still not enough. And he gives three reasons why he's not satisfied. Aleph. Even in the era when the sanctity of the month was based on eyewitnesses, on the sighting of the new moon. Even during that era, not every month was sanctified in this way. Shaharei, because the Rambam teaches, Ein mekachin ela chodesh shenira bizmanai. You only are, the Beis Din is only mekadesh if the witnesses saw the moon in the right time on the 29th day. But if that day goes by and they didn't see the beginning of the moon, then by default, the next day becomes Rosh Chodesh because it can't be more than 30 days in a month. So there were months, even during that era, that the Beis Din was not Mekadesh the month. Number one. Number two, in this mitzvah, Nichlal, Ladas HaRambam, the Rambam in his halachas, in his writings, he explains that included in this mitzvah is also gam ulachashiv shanim v'chadashim bebeis din, that the Beis Din should calculate astronomically the months and the years. V'davar ze nikra b'lashon ibor shanim. And when they had to add a 13th month, this was called a pregnant year. V'loi kiddush shanim. And it's not called the sanctification of the years, but the impregnation of the year. And Gimel, and thirdly, Lashita Sarambam, in according with the opinion of the Rambam, halacha l'Moshe Messinai hu shebizman sheyesh Sanhedrin koivin al pi hara'iyah, that Moshe taught Klal Yisrael that in the time that there's a Sanhedrin, the months would be ascertained by eyewitness. ובזמן שאין שם סנהדרין, כיוון על פי החשבון הזה, שאנו מחשבים בו היום, ואין נזקקים לראייה. And when there's no Sanhedrin, then the months are established based on the calculations that we use today, and you don't need a sighting. Ulech'er, seemingly, lefiza, based on this, gam hakfiyas al pi hacheshbon nichleles b'mitzvos kiddush hachodesh. This means, based on the Rambam's writing and his opinion, that even when you ascertain the months according to astronomical calculations and mathematical computations, this is all included in the mitzvah of sanctifying the month. Very ba'ofen ze ein mekachin kanal, de ein mekachin el al re'iyah. But then it seems that you don't have this aspect of it being sanctified by the Beis Din, because the Beis Din only sanctifies based on sighting on the part of the witnesses. So the Rebbe is saying that he's still not satisfied with why is this the mitzvah rishona, because earlier he built a case that it really showcases the purpose and the goal of all of Torah mitzvahs, which is to transmute and transform the pedestrian into holy. But now the Rebbe showed us 3 reasons why lav dafka, it's not always the case that the Beis Din were mekadesh l'chodesh. Certainly not the case today. And yet, all of this, the Rambam says, is still part of this mitzvah v'chodesh zelachet. And Rashi calls it the mitzvah rishona, with which the entire Torah should have started. So what is there more in this mitzvah? We have to still plumb the depth of this mitzvah through the Rebbe's eyes to understand its enormity and profundity.
Sorry,
Zayin.
can you just clarify, is the problem that sometimes it's by default and not with involvement of the Beis Din? Is that the issue?
That was even in the time when it was the Beis Din that was being Mekadesh al pi hara'iyah, even in that era. Then he says that we have all the time where it wasn't al pi hara'iyah b'chlal. It was by calendrial, by astronomical, by mathematical calculations, like we have today. And that is also considered part of this mitzvah. And then he says that in that, and that's base, I'm sorry that went out of order. The second point that the Rebbe raises is that the Rambam says that this mitzvah, Chodesh Elachem, also includes ulechashiv shonim v'chadashim bebeis din, the calculations, the astronomical calculations the Beis Din engaged with. So the Rebbe is building a case for saying that there has to be more here than the inyan of being Mekadesh l'Chodesh. There's much more here the Rambam is teaching. And when we understand what more there is here, we will come into a new understanding of the enormity of this mitzvah. That it's not just that they were Mekadesh al pi ha're'iyah. Because there were many months, even in that era, where it wasn't al pi ha're'iyah, it was default.
What in base that Ibor Shanim, not Kiddush Shanim? What is the idea here?
The Rebbe is going to explain it momentarily. Zion. V'yuvon bahaktim hatam lekach shenokat harambam b'manoisei mitzvah zu b'mina mitzvahs b'loshen lekadesh chadashim ulechashev shanim v'chadashim. And we're going to understand this by first prefacing with understanding the reason why the Rambam cites this particular terminology when he enumerates the mitzvahs. So in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, he says, and this is his terms, that the mitzvah is to sanctify the months and to calculate the years and the months. Ve'ilu b'halachis gufa kasav, and in his halachis, where he unpacks the mitzvah, he writes, B'tchilas hilchis Kiddush HaChodesh, in his preface to the halachis of Kiddush HaChodesh, he writes, mitzvahs aseh achas mitzvah aseh achas, it's one positive commandment, v'hi l'chashev, v'leida, v'likboya, be'eze yom tchilas kol chodesh mechatshei hashana. It's one mitzvah to calculate, to know, and to establish on what day the new month begins. Val derech ze b'fnim halachis. So the Rebbe is enumerating 3 times the Rambam writes this lashon l'chashev. Within the halachis itself, he writes mitzvah aseh min Torah. It's a positive commandment from the Torah. Al beis din, the mitzvahs on the beis din. Sheyachashvu v'yedu. They should calculate and they should know im yerah hayarech or lo yareh, if there will be a sighting of the moon or not. And here he doesn't even mention sanctifying the month. It's about calculating. Okay. So now the Rebbe says, "Bepashtos hatam l'shinui zehu mishum shegam kfiyas hachadashim v'ibur hashanim al pi hacheshbon nichlolin l'shitas harambam b'mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh." Simply speaking, the reason for this terminology, because the Rebbe is parsing this terminology, is because establishing the months and sometimes having to make a leap year, and all of these calculations, which the Rambam includes in this mitzvah, are all part of the same mitzvah. You have to do all of these things in order to be Mekadesh l'Chodesh. And it's not just establishing the month and sanctifying the month based on the citing of the witnesses in the time of the Sanhedrin, but there's much more that goes into it. So b'pashta, simply speaking, that's why the Rambam mentions all this. Aval adayin drusha hasbara. But the Rebbe says, not so fast. This still requires explanation. Lama hiskir harambam rak inyan zeh bichlal ha-mitzvah aseh l'chashev v'leida v'likboya be'eze yom tchilas kol chodesh v'loi kolal b'mitzvah zu games inyan kiddush ha-chodesh likboya l'kadesh al pi ha're'iyah. But in the pnim, in where he gets into the halacha, why does the Rambam speak about the calculations and knowing and establishing on which day is going to be Rosh Chodesh, and he doesn't even mention Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctification al pi ha're'iyah? So this is startling, and also is going to become very instructive. Ches. V'yesh loymar habir bazeh. And we know already that whenever the Rebbe says V'yesh loymar, the Rebbe is about to give us a novel explanation. Kol habriya harehi b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael. As already ascertained above, the entire creation is for the purpose of Torah and the purpose of the Jews keeping the Torah. V'akavana b'kachi l'chol inyane habriya. And when we say this, the intention is to include every aspect of creation. Hashamayim v'ha'aretz v'chol tzva'ehem. Heaven, earth, and all of its aspects. Ve'ein hadavar kein rak b'negei l'hisavotzim b'chlal. Ela zeu initzmidi. And this is not just regarding their creation, that Hashem created the world and then went on vacation, but as we know, it's a constant, unremitting process. Every nano moment, Hashem recreates the world from beginning. And toichen avedasa shel Yehudi hu legalos ulahavi l'dei poyelis hatachlis b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael b'vriya. And what, if you had to synopsize the whole purpose of a Jew, the whole avodah of a Jew is to reveal and to actualize this goal that the world was created for the Torah and for Jews, and to showcase it in creation. So when a Jew fulfills a mitzvah with some chayfetz, something that exists in this world, hu mimale umashlim bikach es mataras habriya, he brings to fruition and to completion the purpose of creation, bishvil shel davar zeh mesuyim, because the world was created bishvil for this reason, and now he takes this particular thing, this particular table, chair, food, car, pocketbook, scarf, whatever it is, and brings its purpose to fruition. Shehi b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael, that this thing was created for Torah and for Yisrael. Umemela hadavar nasa chayfetz shel mitzvah, and this way, this plain thing, whatever it was, becomes an object of mitzvah. Uladugma, for instance, kasha Yehudi oiseh me'or habehema klaf avor sefer Torah. A Jew takes hide of an animal and makes from it parchment upon which will be written a sefer Torah, or tefillin, or mezuzahs. Al yidei zeh, through this, mismalas v'nishlemes mataras bria or habehema. So through this becomes fulfilled and completed the purpose for the creation of this hide. Miklaf zeh nasa chefzu de Torah. From this physical thing becomes a Torah thing, ubigoloi, and this happens in a revealed way. And because time is also a created entity, move on, it's understood. The same is true for the existence of time. Time was created for Torah and for Yisrael. And this is the content, the point of mitzvahs kiddush chodesh. Al yedei zeh sheYisrael mikatshim chadashim Rosh Chodesh me'adem. Through this, that Jews sanctify months, and then we get Rosh Chodesh, and we get the holidays. Hey megalim shemetzius hazman la'amitasa hi b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael. Through this, we reveal that the true reason for the existence of the world, true reason for the existence of time, is for Torah and for the Jews. Uk'moshe perish David HaMelech, and David HaMelech teaches or comments in Tehillim, Asa Yereach, Hashem made a month. For what reason? Lamayadim. In order that we should have the special times, the appointed times that we meet Hashem, the Yamim Tovim. Ukashem shebenegei l'chol inyanei habriya kavana eina rak milui mataras briya shel chayvetz mesuyim zeh, ela hakavana hi shadavar yifala yosef b'chol habriya. And just like when it comes to all aspects of creation, the intention is not just that we should sanctify and elevate that thing, that particular thing, But the overarching intention is that by elevating or transforming that thing, it should add Kedusha to all of creation. Okay, so there's two things happening simultaneously. There's the way in which we're all sitting someplace, right, at desks or tables or counters or whatever it is, right? So now that surface is becoming elevated through our learning. But it's not just that surface, because the elevation or the transformation of that contributes to the overall transformation of the entire universe, ubechol pratea, in all of its detail. V'zois, al yedei zeh shekol davar b'vriya misayea umevi haisafa liyehudi b'avodasai. It's the proverbial butterfly effect. Every time something is transformed and elevated, it adds to everything else and to the avodah of every Jew everywhere. Ubazeh yesh chaluka l'kama dargos. And the Rebbe says that really everything that is transformed and elevated affects everything else. There's no degrees of separation, but there are gradations and iterations. How so? There's machshirei mitzvah. There's the way in which some things become preparation or a help for doing a mitzvah. So you take the boards from Home Depot, or you take the celery from the supermarket, and then it becomes part of a mitzvah. Then there's machshir lemachshir. Then there's something that will help for something that's going to help, that's going to be streamlined into mitzvah, creates a. And I think this will be helpful. Ha'ara 50, footnote 50, very, very quick. The Rebbe says like this. He brings down from the Gemara. Karsin eitzim lasais pchamin. You cut down trees in order to make coal. What are you going to do from the coal? Lasais barzel. You're going to be able to make a fire. You're going to be able to smelt copper. And what are you going to make? What are you going to be able to make from that? Le'izmel shalmila. You're going to be able to craft a knife, a very specific knife needed for circumcision. So all of these aspects, it's just a matter of gradation. They all become hechsher to mitzvah. Al derech zeh, va'af yosem mizeh, u'benegei lezman. So now the Rebbe is going to say that this is even more so the case with time. Okay? He has established that the truth of the matter is that any time that we do avodah and we take something in this world that was given to us from before we were conceived, everything that we will have is already apportioned to every neshama, and we take something and we use it for the purpose of kedusha, we transform it and we elevate it. That facilitates the avodah that every other Jew is doing everywhere else, and all of this in the aggregate impacts everything else. And this is even more true when it comes to time, to increments of time. Shahat shlomas mataras habriya shel chachi hashana eina rak b'kfiyas b'kiddush reish chodesh hamoed hashana. That the truth of the matter is that the way in which the Beis Din sanctifies time is not just for the purpose of Rosh Chodesh or the holidays that will follow. Dahainu yamim misuyamim b'chodesh, meaning it's not just that this affects only certain days of the month, ella, but rather, kasher nikeres umorgeshes b'chol meshech hazman gam la'achrei Rosh Chodesh kulei hatachlis b'shvil atay b'shvil Yisrael. V'zois al yidei shebeis din mekayim es hamitzvah zeh l'chashev v'leida v'likboya be'ezeh yom tchilas kol chodesh michadshei hashana. The Rebbe says that it's not just Rosh Chodesh, it's not just the Yamim Tovim that will come out on certain days based on when the Beis Din called Rosh Chodesh. But the truth of the matter is that this is recognized and felt in all the time, in all the days between Rosh Chodesh and the Yom Tov, after Rosh Chodesh, after the Yom Tov. It's all impacted. And it's all through this mitzvah aseh that the Beis Din keep, which is to calculate and to know and to establish on which day will be the first day of the month and the year. כאשר לשם כך זקוקים בייס דין לחשב ולדעת את פרטי החשבון של המהלך הלבן וכולי, ויודעים מקומות הכוכבים ומהלכם. And this is the reason that the Beis Din have to be very well versed and schooled in all the details of astronomical calculations and the rotations of the moon and the sun and the stars and so on and so forth. Kiloimar, this is to say, that in addition to how this affects Rosh Chodesh and the sanctification of Rosh Chodesh, Hanasim Gam L'Tzerech HaMoedes, which is done to facilitate the holiday, so we know which day we should keep Yom Tov. Ba'ofen shehazman shebintayim hu me'ein hechsher bilvad l'kedusha hazman shel HaMoedes. So you might think that the days in between Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov are just adjacent to, they're hechsher. They're like the boards with which you're going to build a sukkah, but they're not actually holy. Because in order to get to Rosh Chodesh, you need to know the days before and the days after, and so on and so forth. But the Rebbe says, no, Hine Yeser al Kain, there's more. And that is that Etzem HaCheshbon Shebeis Din Yechoshvu V'yedu Im Yereach HaYereach. The calculation itself, qua calculation, so that the Beis Din will know and be able to calculate if there will be a sighting or there won't be a sighting. Something that impacts the whole, rotation of the moon for the whole month. This is all part of the mitzvah aseh. That's what the Rambam is teaching us when he keeps drilling down on the word l'chashev, to calculate. It's all part. Ha-mitzvah say, Ein rak kiddush hayom to Rosh Chodesh. It's not just about sanctifying the day of Rosh Chodesh. Ela yechashvu v'yedu. It's about all the calculations. It's about all the knowledge that goes into it. Kach shebechol meshech hazman gufa nikeres begolui hatachlis b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael. So in other words, in order to land on Rosh Chodesh and later on the Yomim Tovim, you need to have a calculation about all the days of the month, all the days of the year, which means that all of this time becomes subsumed in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. It all becomes holy. Question. So even the sanctification of Rosh Chodesh couldn't happen till the giving of the Torah. Oh, because you're talking about the fact that holiness couldn't saturate the physical as well as every object we use for mitzvahs. Yes. Tess. V'yesh loymar shagam mitam zeh mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh hi mitzvah rishona shenitztavu bo Yisrael. The Rebbe says, based on what we now understand, we might say that this is another reason why Kiddush HaChodesh is called mitzvah rishona, the first mitzvah that the Jews were commanded. Hatachlis b'shvil haTorah b'shvil Yisrael sheminyane habriya b'chlal eina kayemes b'oifen yashar b'goli b'chol habriya kula. This purpose that everything was created for Torah and for Jews is not always seen in a straight and revealed way in all matters of creation. Okay, let's even say that every single Jew is simultaneously involved in a mitzvah, and it elevates the oxygen that they're breathing and all the nutrients that are vivifying them, and they are being hydrated by the water. And maybe this even elevates the well that the water came from, or the system through which it comes, and the supermarket in which they shopped, and the clothing that they're wearing, the house that they're sitting in, etc., etc., etc. But la'achar kolela, after all of this, we're not even a decimal point on the Chinese census. So even if we're all doing our work, there's still so much of the world that is not manifesting that the world was created b'shvil Torah, b'shvil Yisrael. Yesh chafetzim anasim ba'asmim kedusha mitzvah, oy tashmish kedusha v'tashmish mitzvah, oy lemata b'zeh. It's true. There are things that become holy themselves, or a mitzvah. Then there are things that they facilitate a mitzvah, they facilitate holiness, or even lower in the totem pole. That what a Jew is doing is not mamish a mitzvah, but it's all l'shem shamayim. Or b'chol drachacha da'ehu, this Jew is doing something that's not holy in and of itself, but he knows Hashem in all of his ways. V'yesh dvarim sheim rak machshir machshir demachshir. V'af pachis mizeh. Ad sheba'ifen yashar ba'ifen galoi ein kol kesher b'neim liyehudi l'Torah. And so you go through all the iterations, and you're still going to come up with a lot of things that don't have a straight, direct, revealed connection to a Jew or to Torah. But what happens is that when you do elevate something of that category, it elevates the entire category. The Rebbe is going to explain what this means in the brackets. Like the Rebbe explains in Tanya, regarding sacrifices. Through offering one animal, hayakol hachai oila lashem. The whole category of animal life is elevated. And the whole category of vegetation is elevated through a small amount of fine flour that is mixed with oil. And this is true with tzedakah, the Rebbe says in Tanya. That when you give a fifth to Torah, you give a chaimish to tzedakah, you elevate all the other four. You're giving 1/5. What about the 4/5? It's all being elevated. It all becomes a resting place for Hashem. The Rebbe says this is true regarding makom or chayfetz, regarding space, regarding our overtures, regarding the things we interact with. But when it comes to time, as we spoke above, but the Rambam is underscoring that the mitzvah includes the calculations. They have to know and they have to establish on which day is going to become the first day of the Chodesh. Hainu mitzvah v'ha'pa'ula shel Yisrael based in he bechol zman ha'chodesh ba'ofen yashar. Here there is a direct and unremitting connection to each moment in time. So when it comes to space, when it comes to things, not everything has a direct correlation, a revealed connection to b'shvil HaTorah, b'shvil Yisrael. But time, everything is included in this mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And the Rambam keeps underscoring this. Not that we would know that if not for the Rebbe teaching us this, pointing it out. Yud. Al pizeh yesh levar is diuk lashon harambam bereish hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. Now, based on this understanding, we can further explain the specificity of the terminology that the Rambam uses at the beginning of his treatment of the halachos regarding Kiddush HaChodesh. He says, and this is a quote, "V'hashanim she'anu mechashrim him shnei hachama shenemar shamar es Chodesh ha'aviv." The Rambam says that the years that are calculated are the years of the sun, as it says, you must keep the month of spring. Okay? And the Rebbe says, "Haperish hapashut bazehu." The simple explanation of what the Rambam means with these words is, "V'tchilas halacha kasav Rambam shechatche hashana him chatche halavana." At the beginning of his treatment of these halachas, he writes that the months of the year are the months of the moon. Hainu she'ein kol echad me'achadashim chelek echad miyud beis mishnas hachama elahim chatche halavana. This means that each month is not 1/12 of the annual rotation of the sun. It's rather 12 moon months. She'archam esim v'tisha yamim umachzel erech. And how long is every lunar month? It is about 29 and a half days. La'erech. And then he continues and he adds, that this notwithstanding, that our year is comprised of 12 lunar months, because Pesach has to happen in the season of the spring, and the seasons are established based on the solar rotation, and the solar month is longer than the solar year is longer than the lunar year based on 12 lunar months with approximately 11 days. So because we have a mitzvah, the Pesach has to happen in the spring, and the seasons go according to the sun, and because there is a disjunction between the length of the solar year and 12 lunar months, there's an 11-day discrepancy. Yesh l'chashiv es hashanim lefi machalach hachama, v'lachein b'chol shtayim ay shloi shanim koivim based in shana muberes. So how does the Beis Din treat this disjunction? By establishing a leap year every 2 or 3 years. As the Rambam explains in the next halacha. And as he explains in the ensuing chapters, Asher hadvarim shehena ikar shema'abrim b'shvilan kedei sheyu hashanim shnei hachama. That there are things that have to be done to correlate these two rotations, and therefore you have to add a leap year. But this is because we have to go according to the solar year. So we have to go according to the solar year on one hand. We have to count our months according to the moon. There's a discrepancy in the rotation, and therefore the Beis Din had to be ma'aber shanim. Okay, that seems to be the reason, the simple reason why the Rambam writes, go back to the first paragraph in Yud, V'hashanim sha'anu mechashrim him shnei achama, that the years that we calculate are the years of the sun. Ella, but the Rebbe says, however, Shemi Pashtus Lashon HaRambam, if you didn't have this, if you weren't taught this already, okay, because presumably a lot of us are familiar with this idea already. So when we read the words of the Rambam, we're like superimposing on those words what we already know, right? That there's a 19-year cycle, and in that 19-year cycle, there has to be every 2 or 3 years, Shana Muberes, a leap year, and so that Pesach always comes out in the spring, and so on and so forth, right? But the Rebbe says, Mi pashtus lashon Rambam mashma, but if you were to take the words of the Rambam without any previous knowledge that you're bringing to the table, then it's understood she'ibur ze'ena rak l'tzarech hamayadais. From the words of the Rambam, simply his words, it seems it's not just about the holidays, not just about Pesach happening in spring. Al menashe Pesach yachol b'zman aviv. Ubefrat Rambam lo hiskes klal b'alachazu, especially because Rambam doesn't even mention the whole idea that Pesach has to happen in the spring. El rak hevi as chelek hapasuk shamor chodesh aviv. He only brings a part of the verse. He alludes to it. Kim zeu din b'shana b'chlal sheyu shanim shnei chama. V'raksha hadavar nilmad mishomer chodesh aviv. From the Rambam's words, it seems that what he's saying is that part of this mitzvah is to calculate the years. And we learn this from the words in the Torah, Shomer Chodesh Aviv, you should watch over the month of spring. V'tzarech lahavim. And the Rebbe says we have to understand. Okay? And again, this is all to plumb the depth and the profundity of this mitzvah, the mitzvah Rishona about consecrating time, that we should understand just how wide and how deep and all-encompassing it is. That it's not just about Rosh Chodesh, it's not just about the holidays, but there's lots more. Even though the cycle is comprised of 19 years, matam l'shnei hachama, which correlates with the cycle of the sun, mitzad ha'isafa shel chodesh ha'ibor kach shela'ez seif ha'machzor yut hashana mishtava shneis halavana l'shneis hachama. And so by adding leap months, by adding a second chodesh adar at regular intervals, whether 3 or 2 years, at the end of a 19-year cycle, the sun and the moon are correlated once again. V'azai lo yishor mimini me'achama b'chol 19 rishona chutz misha achaz v'arba me'os u'shmonim v'chamisha chalakim. And there's not going to be a discrepancy between the solar and the lunar cycles, except for 1 hour and 485 chalakim. And I don't know, I've heard chalakim translated as seconds, moments, nanoseconds. I don't know the correct term. But after 19 years, there'll be complete symmetry, almost, except for 1 hour, 485 chalakim. Hari b'payel. But the Rebbe says, even though this is true every 19 years, but practically speaking, kol shana b'fnei atzma michol hashanim eina shnas hachama. But the truth of the matter is that every year taken by itself is not going to be a solar year, which is comprised of 365 yamim, 365 days, shasa yamim. Why? Because it's either going to be shneim aser chadshe levana, it's either going to be 12 lunar months, which brings us to a total of 354 days, or it's going to be 13 lunar months, which brings us to a grand total of 383 days. It's not going to be 365. Yud Aleph, Val Pi Hanal Yesh Lemar. But based on the above, we might say, Me'achar shemitzvos kiddush hachodesh bo legalis his mataras brias hazman b'shvil atar b'shvil Yisrael. Once we understand that the mitzvah of kiddush hachodesh comes in order to reveal the purpose of the creation of time, that time is b'shvil atar, is for Torah, and b'shvil Yisrael, and for the Jews. U'kenal, and as said above, shalidei zeh nasa hazman mitzir shel Torah, and all time becomes the existence, a Torah existence. Hare muvenes hadgashas harambam. So based on what the Rebbe explained, we can understand what the Rambam is trying to underscore, what he is trying to amplify, what he is trying to focus on. V'hashanim she'anu mechashvim him shnei chama. He says that the years that we calculate are sun years, are solar years. The intention is to effect every aspect of time through the agency of this mitzvah. Not only increments of time called months, which are based on the cycle of the moon, but also this mitzvah is about consecrating. It's about really co-opting. It's about exporting time from the mundane, the pedestrian, into kodesh, into sacred, into sublime. And Shana has to do with the sun, because, like it says, Ein Lulvana Shana Klal. The moon has nothing to do with year. Umemela, and therefore, Ein Dai B'chishuv Hatkufas Chului Lefi Mahalach Hashemesh Rak Al Manas Ladas Masay Lahisivus Chodesh Ibor. And therefore, it's not enough to just calculate time based on the solar rotation for the sole reason of knowing when to put in an extra month in the year to make it a Shnasa Ibor. In order that Pesach and Nisan should come out in the spring. Because that's still a detail and a halacha that has to do with the months of the year. Elazman Hashana Gufa Kula. But rather, the Rambam is underscoring that the year itself, not just the months of the year itself has to be elevated, it has to be consecrated. The year itself has to become an existence that's a Torah existence. And it's only this way that the sun reaches its true reason for having been created. This happens through the Beis Din immersing themselves in the calculations of the solar years. This is really fascinating. The Rebbe says, and therefore we find that there are certain dinim, there are certain mitzvahs in the Torah that depend on the solar year. In other words, all of time has to be included in this project of Bria Sa'elam, Bir Rashis, Beis Rashis, for the purpose of Torah and for the purpose of Yisrael. And therefore, this has to find expression in mitzvahs. Uladugma, here's an example of a mitzvah that expresses the 365 days of the year. Hakteres Shahis and Nasis, Midei Shana, Bekach Bechol Hashanim Kulan. Shasa mana keneged yemais hachama. When the Keteris, when that particular combination was put together for usage in the Beis Hamikdash, this was done every year, all the years. It was divided into 365 portions, one portion for every day of a solar year. Afal pi, although she'al yedei zeh, that by doing it this way, you have created the imperative. Liftois es hashirayim. You have to redeem the extra that wasn't used, because as we already said, a regular year does not have 365 days. But by dividing the Keteris in 365 portions, you created the necessity to now do something, go through a protocol where you redeem the leftovers, ulahiridam, and you have to demote them, mikodesh lachol. You have to take them from hekdesh, and you have to make them something that a Jew could use for some other purpose. Ulashem kach, nitztavinu liyos mechashvin shnei achama kapshuta. And for this reason, because of this mitzvah and others, that's why the Beis Din had a mandate to calculate the years of the month. Not just in ancillary fashion to facilitate the fact that Pesach has to happen in the spring, but because the year, not just the month, solar time, not just lunar time, has to be elevated. It has to be transformed. Al pi kol hanal, based on everything said above, Yuvon Gama Kesher Bein, Pasach Bevreshis, that Bereshis opens up with the idea of Bereshis Bar Lakim, Chayach Maser Tikid Amoy, that Hashem tells his nation about the greatness of what he did. Laseis Lehem Nachlas Goyim, to give them a nachla, a inheritance that first belonged to the other nations. Ubein HaChayder Zelachem, Shehi Mitzvah Rishonish Nesabu Ba Yisrael. Now we're in a position to really appreciate the correlation between these two. Because there's an inherent connection between these two. Inyan koyach mas of higid la'amar loisas lehem nachal as goyim, kibush Eretz Yisrael. This idea that Hashem told his nation about the greatness of what he did, and through this he gave them the possibility to take over land that belonged to other nations, kibush Eretz Yisrael, to conquer the land of Israel. Mirames, this alludes to Umayra, and it teaches al havoida shel vikivshuha. This really alludes to the larger idea of creation of this universe, where Hashem says, "Pru urvu umilu es haaretz vikivshuha." You should be fruitful and multiply, and you should fill this world, and you should conquer the world. Kibush gashmi es ha'olam. You should conquer the material, the physicality of this world. Shebnei Yisrael yikavshuhu v'yahafchuhu l'kedusha, for the purpose of transforming it to holiness. Al derech Eretz Yisrael, Eretz HaKodesh. Just like you took a land that was Eretz Canaan, it was just territory, and by conquering it, you transformed it into Eretz HaKodesh. And the same thing with time. Dainu, this mitzvah of this idea that the Torah opens with Bereishis bara Elokim is hamshachas hakdusha b'makom. This is about bringing holiness into space. And this is the connection to the mitzvah, this month shall be to you. Shahu hamshachas hakdusha bizman. So Bereishis bara Elokim, kayach Ma'asav higid la'amar loisas lehem nachal as goyim. That is about the mandate to saturate space with holiness, and this mitzvah is the mandate to saturate time with holiness. Afal pishas man hu chelek ma'abriya, uba'efen shelo nitan la'arichai u'lekatzrei. Even though time is an aspect of created existence, it's an indisputable construct. You can't elongate time, you cannot shorten time. V'hu chal b'gdarav. Time operates within its parameters. Avar, haive, v'asid, past, present, or future. Ala kol b'shaveh. And, like we say, time will do its thing equally. Hine Yisrael oisem oisei l'mitzias chefta shel Torah mitzvahs. But still in all, even though time seems to be impermeable to our overtures, you can't make that a day should be 26 hours long. You can't make that it should be 10 hours long. But the Jew has the power to take on time and to turn it into a chefza, a thing of Torah mitzvahs. And it's not just that we have the kayach, the ability to impact the months that are correlated with the lunar, about which it says that we count according to the moon, or also compared to the moon. And the lunar cycle has a direct connection and correlation with the holidays. Elagam eshnei hachama, but we also have the ability to saturate and transform. The years have to do with the months, which hashayachas l'chayr l'umas ha'elam. Seemingly, that has nothing to do with us. That's the way the other nations count time. But we have the ability to transform. Af oisan mahavchem Yisrael, even that Bnei Yisrael can transform. Kach she'hashanim she'anu mechashrin heim shnei hachama. So much so that the Rambam teaches that the years that we calculate are the years also of the solar rotation. Af mitziuzu nas is man Yehudi. Even this becomes Jewish time. Shana Yehudis, a Jewish year. Uprat b'mitzvahs haTorah, and time becomes an aspect of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Rishon hu lachem lechache hashana. It becomes, if you look now with a new appreciation for the words of the Torah, this is the first of the months of the year. Usually we just looked at that and said, okay, Nisan is the first of the year. We were focusing on Nisan. But now the Rebbe is underscoring Hashana, the way in which we can also impact, saturate, and elevate the year. I'm gonna look at the comments in the chat after we finish the Sikha. And through our work of conquering the earth spiritually, and also in conquest of time, we will hasten the time when practically we will conquer Eretz Yisrael physically, bevias Mashiach Tzadkenu, with the coming of Mashiach, asher asid liyos mekabet nitche Yisrael. Well, Mashiach is going to collect and bring together all of the far-flung Jews, and then will come to fruition the promise that I will restore your judges, she'inyanam Torah, kivari sheina. And judges are all about Torah, and Hashem says, I'm going to restore it like in days of yore. V'yeshuvu Yisrael liyos mechashvin v'koivin chadashim u'ma'avrin shana be'eretz Yisrael. And once again, Bnei Yisrael will calculate and will establish months and will create leap years when necessary, and this will all happen be'eretz Yisrael al pi ha're'iyah, based on citing al yidei Sanhedrin, through the agency of the Sanhedrin, asher mekoimam v'taikvam hu, their place and their strength is belishkas hagazish al yidei mizbeach. The Sanhedrin used to convene and adjudicate from a place called the stone room that was right near the Mizbeach, Shebeveis Hamikdash be'Eretz Yisrael, that was located in the Beis Hamikdash in Eretz Yisrael, and this should all happen b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, speedily in our day, literally. I want to apologize